Well, good morning. I hope that you are doing well this morning. Hope that you had a nice weekend, were able to enjoy your time together as families, and that you were able to join us virtually for worship yesterday. I know that we all long for this season to be behind us to be able to come together again, not just virtually, but actually, in order to see each other's faces and embrace one another, worship together, enjoy the Lord's Supper, and just really enjoy our time together as a body. Well, this week is Easter week, and it's definitely got a different feel to it. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. Typically, we're thinking about Good Friday service and sunrise service on Sunday, and all that awaits us on that wonderful Easter Sunday that we get to celebrate together. But this Easter Sunday, everything will be done virtually. But in order to sort of help us along through this week and just, give to us a sense of Easter and what it is that we are moving towards, we wanted to this week provide a series of devotions that really focused in on the final week of Christ's life here on earth prior to the crucifixion. And so each day this week, we want to sort of turn our attention to a different event that transpired in this final week of Christ's life. Now, probably the best place to be able to turn to do this is the Gospel of John. The way that John himself divides up his gospel is really conducive to doing this. We have what are called the book of signs in the first 12 chapters or 11 chapters, I should say, up to chapter 12, where there are 7 signs, 7 being the number of perfection and completion, that are pointing towards and confirming that Jesus is indeed the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so these signs are meant to point to that and validate that. But then once we get to chapter 12, what happens is that there is now the attention shifts and is focused squarely upon the final week of Christ's life. So that here there is tremendous attention given to the details of the significant events that take place in this climactic time in Jesus' earthly ministry. And so with that in mind, this morning I wanted to focus our attention on the first of these events. It's that event that kicks off this Passion Week in Christ's life. It's found in the first 8 verses of John's Gospel, chapter 12. As there, Mary anoints Jesus for burial. And she does so by pouring out a pound of this very expensive pure nard upon him in preparation for his burial. Now, the passage itself, I'd like to read for you and then just make a few comments about it. Now, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." Now, here's the scene that we have here. We have Jesus together with his disciples, along with Mary and her sister Martha, and Lazarus, and they're here gathered together for this feast, and this is now 6 days before the Passover, so we're in the final week of Jesus' life. And this was a a big celebratory feast. I mean, this is now probably about 2 or 3 weeks after Jesus had just raised Lazarus from the dead, after he had been dead for 4 days. And so now they're gathered together to celebrate this meal. And as they do so, we're told that Mary, she takes a pound of ointment made of pure nard, and she breaks this jar that it was placed in, and anoints Jesus' feet with this ointment, and then wipes his feet with her hair. And that's an absolutely extravagant act of worship that is rightly termed here as a preparation for his burial. Because here what we have is we have Mary taking, in essence, what was likely everything she had, and taking it and pouring it out on Jesus as an expression of worship. You see, nard, and we read that and we know, what in the world's pure nard? Well, nard is this aromatic herb that is found in the high pasture land of the Himalayas between Tibet and India. And so to get nard, again, we're back in the 1st century, to get pure nard from that place high in the Himalayas there between Tibet and India, and to get it down through the mountain passes and across all of that desert land and sea, roughly about 4,000 miles from there all the way to Israel, that was no small feat. And that made pure nard an incredibly valuable commodity. So that if you're talking about a pound of ointment made of pure nard, you're talking about what would be the equivalence of about a year's wage. So in our terms, we would think of it's roughly about $40,000. That's what it would have been in real money terms to someone like Mary. And moreover, you see, back in the ancient times, they didn't have savings accounts. They didn't have IRAs and so forth. So the place where one would store their wealth was typically in commodities. This is where your retirement was. This is where your wealth was stored. And so this likely represented everything that Mary had. And yet here she is, taking it and pouring it out on Jesus, on his feet. Now, why? Why would she do that? Well, we're tipped off as to why she actually would do that here in our passage. You see, in verse 1, we're reminded that now they're back at Bethany, the town where Lazarus was from, whom Jesus raised from the dead. And so we're told that. And then we're told in verse 3 that Mary, therefore, that Mary, in light of that, she took this pure nard and she anointed the feet of Jesus with it. You see, what this is telling us is that what inspired Mary to give to such an incredible degree, so generously, all that she had to her Lord, was the gratitude that she had in her heart for what he had done for her and her family. You see, that's what inspired Mary. It was gratitude for the grace of God that was shown to her and her family in Jesus Christ, in who he was and what he had done. He, the resurrection and the life, had brought life to her family, and very literally to her brother. And so because of that, she took all that she had and in gratitude gave it to him in this incredible act of sacrificial worship. And that's something that is absolutely amazing for us to consider. Because what it does is it shows us how the grace of God in our lives, how it impacts us, and how it takes us and transforms us into these people of tremendous gratitude, so that we become givers, just as Christ himself gave. We in turn become givers to him and to others. You know, there's a wonderful story that illustrates this entire point beautifully. And I just want to share this story briefly with you before we say goodbye. But it's a story that's called Babette's Feast. And the story itself is set in a small village on the coast of Denmark many years ago. And there are two sisters, and they live with their father, who is a Puritan minister over a very small but also a very devout congregation. Well, the father, this minister who was dearly loved by all, he dies. And so his sisters, who had given up many opportunities to pursue romance and to pursue love, they remain on there and keep on with this small little church. Well, over time, the church dwindles even more until it's just 11 sour-faced, self-righteous, unpleasant people. Well, on one stormy, rainy night, a knock comes on the door to the sisters' home. And as they open the door, there stands this middle-aged Parisian woman escaping the French Revolution. And she's standing there drenched and exhausted with a letter of recommendation from one of the sisters' old romantic involvements. And the letter simply says, Babette can cook. Well, the sisters, they take in Babette, and she ends up staying there 14 years with them, cooking and cleaning and doing so for her room and board and so forth. Well, one day, news comes, and it's exciting news, that a lottery ticket, which a friend in France had renewed for Babette every year, has just won 10,000 francs, so a lot of money. And so the two sisters, they celebrate Babette's good fortune, but at the same time, they begin to grieve over what they believe will be, Babette's farewell, that she's now got the money and she's going to go off on her own. But Babette, before she was going to leave, she insists on cooking one last meal for the sisters and for this little bitter, self-righteous congregation of 11 people, all in honor of the 100th anniversary of their father's birth. And so this was going to be Babette's farewell send-off, and Babette insisted on paying for everything, the entire meal, herself out of her own money. And so reluctantly, the sisters, they agree. And so the 11 members of the church, together with the two sisters and a few other guests, they all show up present at this feast. And as winter is howling outside, Babette, she treats them all to this absolutely incredible gourmet dinner of turtle soup and caviar and quail and pastries and champagne and fine, rare wine. And it's unlike anything this village had ever seen before. Well, after the feast, Babette reveals that she was once a world-class chef at this world-renowned cafe in Paris. But the real shock comes when the sisters discovered that Babette had spent her entire 10,000 franc winnings on the feast that she prepared. Now, at first glance, it would seem like this extravagant gift of all that she had was wasted on this unappreciated group of self-righteous, sour-faced people. But that's not the way it turns out, as this gourmet dinner has an amazing, transforming effect on this little church. As old feuds are settled, and friendships and love are rekindled. See, genuine fellowship is revived. As now what's happened is this the impact of the generosity, the kindness, the sacrificial giving of Babette for them and to them has now impacted them in such a way so that they too were transformed into generous and kind and loving people. You see, Babette's generosity, her grace, made these self-righteous and sour-faced church members into gracious and generous people themselves. Well, it's easy to see the parallels, because that's what Christ's generous and gracious gift to us, that's the impact it is to have on us. It's the impact it had on Mary. She realized he'd given her loved ones life. He who was life gave them life. And in giving such a gift, in extending such grace, all she could do was give back. It's all she could do. And that's the impact that grace should have upon us. Realizing what it is that Christ has done for us in giving us life through his own death. Oh, may it have that transformative effect on us, making us into generous and gracious people as well. Oh, may God work this work within us, and may he do so even as this week we reflect on the wonderful sacrifice of Christ on our behalf, that which we remember, particularly on Friday, and that resurrection which we celebrate on Sunday. And so may you all be blessed through this week, even though still social distancing and it's rainy outside. Oh, the sunshine of the resurrected life of Christ is shining in our faces and in our hearts, and it's good news for all of us, and it gives us so much to celebrate. Oh, and inspires us to be like Christ, generous and gracious people ourselves. Oh, may God bless you all this week as you rejoice in your Lord, your Savior, who loves you so much that he gave himself for you, and even now is with you to the very end. God bless you all. Bye-bye.